We are back. I had an amazing weekend, and it was such a really a culmination of everything I've done in my life, and to be invited to an event with people that I really respect, people that I really look up to, that I admire, people that I've gotten to know over the internet for the last few years, and have inspired me to be a better person, to be a better man, to be a better husband, to be a better father. I don't think I would have walked the path I've walked if it wasn't for the bear community. And that's not like, people will think like, oh, you're talking about the business stuff. Yeah, from one perspective, but the other perspective is just the embracing of traditional values, the embracing of being a parent and having lots of children and being an example. Like, I don't think there's any chance I would have gone the last 3 years, basically, without drinking. It's almost 3 years without drinking alcohol if I wasn't a member of the bear community. And the community and the people in it have had such a positive impact on my life. And to be invited to the first ever Beartaria Times National Festival and to have the responsibility of speaking, I really wanted to do a good job. And I didn't want to let the people that organized it down, the people that invited me down, and I didn't want to let the community down, my community. I have two communities, Homeschools Connected and the Bears, which have such a special place in my heart. And it was just such a great experience. So today we're going to talk about what I spoke about in my speech. And I'm basically just going to give the speech here. We're going to do an education worthy of freedom. I'm about to... Hardwood Bear, he knows. Hardwood Bear is ridiculous. Let me tell you something. Hardwood Bear, he started playing chess. I don't know. I'm a little bit of hyperbole, but basically at like 12 or 1 o'clock. And I think I went back over to the chess table at like 6 o'clock, and he was still on the table, and it was just winner stays on. The guy's ridiculous. As I've joked here before, Hardwood Bear knows everything, and now I think he might after seeing him play chess. Appreciate that, brother. It was, you get it. I mean, you've been a member of our community. You know what an honor that was for me for them to let me speak there. And, I was on the plane. I wrote my speech. It took like 3 hours. And then I got there the night before, and the entire time I was at my Airbnb, I was just reading it, going over it again. And I wanted to do a good job, so I'm glad it worked out. At one point, I forgot my line. If you remember, I stopped my speech and grabbed a drink of water. I did that to compose myself because I forgot where I was in the speech, and luckily I was able to do so. All right. Here we go. Let's grab TikTok. 3, 2, 1. Good morning, good afternoon, TikTok. It is a beautiful, beautiful day here in the sunny South. I am very happy to be back in North Carolina, although I was certainly sad to leave Missouri. I just had a wonderful experience in which I was given the honor of giving a speech at the Beartaria Times National Festival, and for anyone not familiar with that community, the bear community, it's top of the line people. So anyway, I'm going to talk about what I spoke about in that speech, and today we are going to talk about an education worthy of freedom. And in order to do that, I think I should start by talking about my own experience and where I came from and how I got to where I am. And a lot of people now, they see I make videos about educational stuff. Like today I posted a cool video on how you could make a literal rainbow. Like your children could make an actual rainbow with light and water and a mirror. But that's one side of what I do. The other side of what I do is really working with parents and teaching them how to better educate their children. And for anyone that sits through this today and what I'm about to go through, you will have a better understanding of how to educate your children after this talk. So for anyone that is new here, you're definitely going to want to sit through this. But I remember when, and I'm just going to go over this basically in my speech that I gave, but I remember when I was a child, I was one of those children that bounced off the walls, right? One of those children that the school system says that child's a problem. And I used to get in trouble a lot. And in order to get me back in line, what the school would do is they would say, all right, Brett, you know what? You can't sit still during class. You don't want to listen to the teacher. And mind you, I'm in elementary school. Well, what we're going to do is we're not going to let you go to recess. And they would put me in the music room. And I remember being a child and sitting there in the music room so bored. And I know my friends were out there crushing, just having a great time playing games like Kill the Carrier, which was our favorite. And that's how they would punish me, which is antithetical to anyone with common sense, because when you have a child, and this is really the school system a microcosm of it, when you have a child that bounces off the walls, you don't punish that child by making him sit still. You need to allow that child to alleviate some of that energy. But the school system doesn't care about that, and we'll get into that because it's a system. So there I was, and I remember this as a child, sitting in the principal's office, which was nothing new. Principal, teacher, school psychologist, and my parents. And the school psychologist looked at my parents and said, we're going to put your child on, they want to put your son on, I believe it was Ritalin, but don't quote me on that because it was so long ago, but they wanted to put me on stuff. And my mom said, yeah, do you have the bottle? Is like, no, I don't. Why? She's like, she said, so I could shove it right up your... And my mom didn't allow them to do that to me. She didn't allow them to put me on that stuff. And by the way, after I gave my speech, so many people came up to me and told me their stories about how when they were children, the school system did just that to them. And unfortunately, a lot of them were put on that stuff. And they talked about what a negative impact that had on their life. Because it's natural for young children, especially young boys, to be hyper and want to run around and want to roughhouse. That's what they should do. That's what they're made to do. They're children. They have a crazy amount of energy. Well, the system doesn't care about that because it's a system. And what it does, or what the people in charge do, is they take any child that doesn't fit into that system and they attempt to alter the child. And the way they do that is through putting them on certain things that I probably should talk around, mentioning, right? Putting them on certain things that will get that child in line and make them sit still. They want to change the child so that the child fits into the system. But I disagree with that. I think you should alter the system so that the system works for the child and how that child is naturally wired. And I think a lot of you agree with that because I have a homeschool crowd. People understand that, but I had to learn that because I came through the system. I got a bachelor's degree in history education. I got a master's degree in special education. And I got a master's degree in special education. And right around that time, I started to wake up to the world. And I started to see some of the problems in the world. And I had a friend of mine refer me to this guy, Richard Grove. Watch this guy, Richard Grove. He really knows his stuff. And I go to Richard Grove and I put on his stuff, and he presented this radically different history than that which I had been presented as I was being trained to be a teacher. And I thought, okay, this guy's an idiot. I'm going to do some research, and I'll prove to my friend that Richard Grove is an idiot. Well, after about 1 week of getting back to primary documents, I realized that I was the idiot. I realized that a lot of the history that I had been taught in school, and we'll talk about why that is, and how to educate your children properly in history and make them into critical thinkers. But a lot of the history I had been taught in school was factually inaccurate. In fact, it was radically inaccurate, if not outright propaganda. So I started to re-examine a lot of my understanding of the world, and I came across this guy, John Taylor Gatto. And anyone, if you guys could like and share, it really helps with that stuff. But I came across this guy, tell your friends about me. I came across this guy, John Taylor Gatto. the late, great John Taylor Gatto, hero of mine. And he was the New York City Teacher of the Year in 1988, 1989, 1990. And he was doing amazing work. He was working in one of the roughest inner cities in New York. And I've been in those schools. I've sat in teachers' lounges in those schools. And they're very rough. They're very tough. It's the type of school where you got to be careful what you say to the students because you're really worried that physical harm might come to you as the teacher, which is crazy to think about for people that haven't experienced that type of environment. But Gatto was working in that type of environment, and is it lagging a little bit? Gatto was working in that type of environment, and he had his inner city students getting better grades than children. Why is everyone suddenly inviting me to go live? Annoying. All of a sudden, I'm getting all these invites to go live with them. I'm not going live with anyone. So all of a sudden, where was I? Sorry, all those live invites threw me off for a second. Oh yeah, so John Taylor Gatto had his inner city students getting better grades on standardized testing than students at elite private schools. And I'm talking like in New York, these are the schools that the Rockefeller types send their kids to, right? And Gatto's students were getting better grades than them on standardized tests. So in 1990, for the third time, he wins the award for New York Teacher of the Year, and he abruptly resigns. And he took out a one-page newspaper article stating that the school system, he could no longer work in a system that was structurally designed to harm children. That's what he said. That was Gatto's argument. And he argued that the school system wasn't a failure, that it was actually very successful at doing what it was really designed to do, the hidden lessons of public school. And we're going to go over those lessons. And he wound up, if for any parent out there who wants to read more about this, he outlined this in a book called Dumbing Us Down, and he wrote another great book, Weapons of Mass Instruction. He wrote a few great books. But the first lesson taught in public school is to know your place. You show up at 8 a.m., you leave at 3 p.m., you do what you're told when you're told to be there. And you go to class, the bell rings, you go to another class, the bell rings, you go to another class, and the bell rings. And if you want to go to the bathroom, you better raise your hand to do it. So you raise your hand and the teacher tells you you can go to the bathroom. And then when you get into the hallway, you better have a hall pass, because if you don't have a hall pass to give to the hall monitor, they send you to the principal's office, and then they don't let you go to recess so that you can know your place. Moderators, anyone who trolls at all while I'm giving this talk, ban them. Anyone that trolls at all, I want none of it. I don't care about it. So the first lesson is to know your place. And the second lesson is that someone's always watching, right? So you know your place, and the hall monitor's watching, the teacher's watching, the security guard is watching. And these are the hidden lessons of public school. And then you get into the instruction itself, where everything in public school is taught out of context, and that creates confusion. So, for example, when children learn about math, they're giving this paragraph. And this paragraph says blah, 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 and it gives you an equation, and you fill in the numbers, and then boom, you calculate its surface area. But it doesn't mean anything to the children, and you hear it all the time. Children are very good at identifying the problems in the school system. So they'll say, when am I ever going to use this? And for people that have sat in teachers' lounges, as I have, little secret, teachers know that the children are right when they say that. Yeah, I mean, some things that are wrong, like some things you are going to use, but most of what you learn at school, you're never going to use in your real world, in the real world, you're never going to use in your life. Well, compare that to how things should be done. This year, our students, we had a year-long nature unit study, and as part of that, they built their own garden boxes, like 2x4 construction, nails, hammers, and before they planted seeds, they were tasked with calculating surface area to determine how many seeds they could plant in that area, how many square feet they had to plant seeds. That is an education in context. But school teaches out of context, and because of that, the third lesson taught in public schools is confusion. The next lesson is indifference. That because everything's out of context, children become indifferent to the work. So after 45 minutes, they take their paper, they shove it in their backpack, they put it in a binder, or my favorite, they crumple it up and throw it in the garbage. These are the real lessons taught in public school, to be indifferent to your work, to not really take anything too seriously because it's not in context, it doesn't relate to anything, and it doesn't really matter. So, know your place. Someone is always watching. You are confused. You are indifferent to your work. And then you get to what the work is and where the work comes from. And I'll go back and answer all your questions, but I'm going over, like, if you sit through this talk, I promise you you will have a better understanding how to raise and educate your children. So let me riff on this. Let me go on this. So then you look at the way instruction is done in public school, where 99% of the work done by students, even up until 12th graders, 17 years old, is assigned by the teacher. So from the time they're in pre-K or preschool, 15 consecutive years of students only doing the work that is assigned to them by a teacher. What are the psychological ramifications of that? And when John Taylor Gatto did his research, he actually found that in elite private schools, the type of schools that the Rockefellers, the type of school that the Rockefellers send their children to, by the time they're in 12th grade, 80% of their work is actually driven by the student, because they're being educated to be the managerial class and your children are being educated to be employees. So children are taught to be intellectually dependent on the system. And the system, ironically, like you'll hear it all the time, as they pressure children to take unforgivable student loan debt without giving them financial literacy to understand what that means, they'll tell children, you have to go to college to discover who you are. Well, the reason they have to go, quote unquote, go to college to discover who they are is because for the last 15 years, anytime they said, hey, I'm interested in this and this is what I'd like to study, they were told, you're not the teacher, you sit down, you shut up, and you do what you're told. Of course they couldn't discover who they are. They should be discovering who they are when they're 4, when they're 5, when they're 6, when they're 7, when they're 10, when they're 13, when they're 15, and they should know who they are by the time they're 18. If you educate them right. Don't cheat your children. Let them follow their interests. They're interested in things. They're curious about the world. This morning, I woke up. I didn't plan on doing this. I planned on doing a rainbow experiment with my son this morning. We woke up and he was asking all these questions about static electricity. So you know what I did? I threw out the lesson and we started learning about static electricity. In fact, I'm probably going to make a science lesson on it next week because he really got the ball rolling on that. We learned about static electricity and we learned about flying lizards and snakes this morning because that's what my son wanted to learn about. So he could discover who he is. What a concept, right? So children are taught to be intellectually dependent on the system. By the way, if you guys could share this, like this, really appreciate that. The next lesson they're taught, and this is just as bad, is to be emotionally dependent on the system. And here's what I mean by that. They're given that assignment that they're told to do, and then they get a letter grade back. And the letter grade is an A, a C, an F. And if they get that A, they're a good apple. They're one of the smart kids. And if they get an F, they're convinced, it's not true, that they're one of the dumb kids. And what they're really taught, and this is reinforced, because they get their report card, they bring it home to the parent, and for most parents, whatever that letter grade says, that's the way the parents will treat them. Oh, you got an F, well, you're bad. make that kid fit into the system, right? Well, maybe the system needs to fit that child. So children are taught to be emotionally dependent on the system. And then, where does that grade come from? Where does that A and where does that F come from? And don't worry, I am not just going to break down the public school system. I am about to cover in depth how you turn your child into a critical thinker, how you develop real skills in your children, and how you give them an education that by the time they're 18, they are capable of living a free and independent life. So where does that grade come from? They get that A if they are able to memorize and regurgitate what was told to them by the teacher or what came from the textbook. The number one lesson taught in public school is that truth comes from authority. The number one lesson taught in public school is that truth comes from authority. But that's how we break down the system. That's what the system really is. And it's one thing to break down the system. It is something else entirely to offer solutions. And what I am about to lay out to you right now is probably, I don't know your journey, the most important talk you will ever hear in terms of how to educate your children. That's the breakdown of the system. But how do we educate our children? How do we give them an education worthy of freedom, which in my definition is an education that by the time they're 18, they are no longer dependent on the government, they are no longer dependent on corporations, and they are no longer dependent on you, the parent. That's an education worthy of freedom. Well, to do that, we first have to understand what freedom requires. And when I think about what freedom requires, I go back to the colonial America. Right after the French and Indian War, when King George owed $133 million to the banks, tremendous amount of money at that time. And he decided that the American colonists were going to pay for it. But the colonists disagreed, and the conflict began. And he implemented the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act. And both of those acts, people forget this, would be repealed. And the reason they were repealed, well, let's talk about it. These people were farmers. They grew their own food. They milked their own cows. They churned their own butter. They sheared their sheep. They took the wool. They made their own clothes. They made their own boots. They made their own candles. They made their own firearms. They cut down their lumber. They built their own houses. These were very capable and very independent people. And because of that, they were able to boycott. And not only did they boycott, but at the height of those boycotts, there were only 2 items that they were still importing from England. And it put so much financial pressure on England that the corporations in England told King George to stop it. And the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act were repealed. They were repealed. So what we learned, and think about the way these people lived. They didn't just do this stuff, but the way they educated their children, they did apprenticeships, right? They were a community. They were rugged individualists with skills and entrepreneurial experience, and then they were united. They were rooted in their Christian community. And when you take people with skills who are independent, rugged people, and you unite them with something like their Christian community, you have a group of people that are very difficult to control. It's one thing not to comply, but these people didn't rely on the system. They relied on themselves and they relied on one another. And because of that, the Stamp Act and the Sugar Act were repealed. They didn't earn their freedom from complaining. They earned their freedom through the manner of which they lived their lives. You earn your freedom through the manner of which you live your life. That is where your freedom comes from, and that is what freedom requires. So now that we defined what freedom is, we could start to talk about how do we give our children an education that is worthy of that freedom. And to me, I think that's 3 goals. You want to give your children an education in critical thinking and the process of learning over memorization, skills over subject matter, not that subjects don't matter, but it takes one skill to free a man, and give them a childhood filled with entrepreneurial experience. And if you do those 3 things, your children will be very well off. But as I said at Beartaria at the festival, that's nice rhetoric. That's really nice rhetoric. Oh yeah, make your child a critical thinker. Give them a master's degree in the process of learning. Did the reception cut out? If it did, I'm just going to wait for a second and then resume. Allow me to drink and catch my breath. How do we make our children critical thinkers? When I was a child, I was taught that Christopher Columbus was the bad man. But by the time I became an adult, like now, when I was a child, I was taught that Christopher Columbus was the man. He was the man. But by the time I became an adult, he was the bad man. What changed? Did the history change? No, the history didn't change. What changed was the political agenda of that day versus the political agenda of the modern day. Because the history taught in schools is really history. It's memorization that will indoctrinate children into whatever the political agenda of the day is. Now, when I was a child, I raised my hand and I said, but weren't there people here? And the teachers were like, shut up, Brett, don't ask questions. Okay. And then you get older and you learn about people like Leif Erikson. You learn about the Vikings being here hundreds of years before the American colonists. You start to look at some of the architecture that existed in the Americas, which, if you ever want to get into architecture and the world fairs and stuff like that, it's really fascinating. But what you learn is that history taught in school wasn't accurate, right? You learn that it wasn't accurate. And what you realize is that history is something that you don't memorize. It can't be memorized. History is something that has to be discovered. History is something that you discover, rediscover, think, rethink, examine, re-examine, and discover again. History cannot be memorized. History is something that has to be discovered. So let's say that your children are interested in the Civil War. Do you have them memorize this or that? No, what I would do is I would have my child, and I don't want my child, by the way, you're the education guy. I don't want my child to memorize the history that I tell him to memorize. I don't want him to learn history from the school system. I don't want him to learn history from me. I want him to discover history for himself, because history is a mystery. So what I would do is have my son read the primary writings of Abraham Lincoln, and then the primary writings of Stonewall Jackson, the primary writings of Ulysses S. Grant, and then the primary writings of Robert E. Lee. Have your child read the primary writings of people on not both sides, but all sides of historical events, because there's usually the left side, the right side, and then the truth somewhere out there. You have them get into the primary documents, read the first-hand accounts, and then your children could formulate their own unique understanding of what happened within historical events. They could come up with their own unique theories about what actually occurred. And by doing that, you're not only teaching them history, but you are training their critical minds. You are training them to be critical thinkers through the manner of which you teach them history. The way that we teach our children history is more important than the history itself. The way we teach them the history is more important than whatever history it is that they're studying. Let's get to science. And I think I'm going to start doing some alchemy lessons along with science, I decided. We're going to start teaching alchemy side by side with science. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's look at the way science is taught in the school system. Here's the Big Bang Theory. Repeat it back as the Big Bang fact. Here is the theory of evolution. Repeat it back as the fact of evolution. The earth is getting hotter. It is your fault. Give Alexandria Cortez and Klaus Schwab all your money and they will save the world. Science has become a form of religious indoctrination. You could block anyone who's trolling, block. Science has become a form of religious indoctrination in the schooling system, where people in lab coats have been elevated into the status of the high priest. I hang out with people that make biochar, by the way, so, okay. But science is taught as a religion, and it's why so many people, when you look around you, were unable to question Mr. Wants to Give You an Ouchie over the last couple of years. People are taught that science is a religion, and that science is the ultimate authority. That truth comes from that higher authority. Well, I agree, truth does come from a higher authority, but that authority gave our children discernment. And it's our job to educate them in a way in which they can access that critical thinking and they can access that discernment. So how do we teach our children science? We have them do observations. We have them observe the world. We have them set up their own experiments, formulate their own hypothesis, always set up controls. Today I put out a new experiment in which children actually make real rainbows because I'm actually not dumb. I know how to make rainbows. Children make real rainbows and they set up a scientific control that will not produce a rainbow within that experiment. Your children should be setting up controls, formulating hypothesis. They should be identifying the independent variable with every experiment. They should be identifying the dependent variable within every experiment. They should be analyzing their experiments for scientific validity. Does this experiment actually measure what I think it measures? One of the experiments we did was apple oxidation, why your apple turns brown, basically, when it's exposed to oxygen. And they set up the controls and everything, and the apple will turn brown. But in the end, it asked them questions. Do you know that the reason the apple turned brown is because the electrons were zapped out of it? Do you really know that? I know you read it, like your reading said that's why it happened, but do you know it? Did you see the electrons? Right? So you have to do more testing to figure out if your experiment really tested for what you thought it tested for, right? Does it have that type of validity? And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But you have to be able to distinguish that if you're going to be able to question Mr. Wants to Give You an Ouchie. Examine your experiments for scientific reliability. If you do your experiment again and again and again, will it produce the same results again and again and again? And if it doesn't produce the same results again and again and again, it's not reliable. And then you have your children study the replication crisis and everything that's gone on with that. And you're training your children not only to think critical about the scientific process, but to question the high priest of the religion of science. You are training your children to be critical thinkers through the way your children study science. The way your children study science is more important than the science your children studies. The way your children study history is more important than the history your children study. You can train your children to be critical thinkers and to use their discernment through the manner of which they study history and the manner through which they study science. Let's go to English. How do we teach our children English? Well, in public schools, they get papers back, and those papers have A's and B's and C's and D's and F's. And what do they learn when they get that paper back? We covered this. They learn, if they got an A, that they're one of the smart kids. By the way, if you trolls, I just want you to know that I did graduate with a 4.0 GPA from my master's program. It was given the award for the #1 student in the program, and that didn't make me one of the smart kids, but, just in case you think about trolling on that. And if you get an F, you're one of the dumb kids. And by the way, your child getting an F does not make them a dumb kid. In fact, the way the grading system is done is completely ridiculous and wrong. I'll get into that later. But they don't learn anything. Whether they got an A or whether they got an F, they don't learn anything. The most important thing you can do if you want your children to grow as a writer is to have them actively engage in the process of editing their writing. So have them do creative writing or any type of writing, and then a week later you sit down with them and you go over their writing line by line. I love this topic sentence, it's really great. I like this sentence, but it ran on a little bit. You could have broken it up with commas, you could have broken it up with a semicolon, you could have used a period and broken this up into multiple sentences. I really like this sentence right here because this is your thesis right here. And this told me what the rest of your essay was going to be about. And I love that all of the points you made in the body of your essay were in alignment with your thesis. Although, next time you might want to think about adding citations. What's a citation? Well, over here you said that Christopher Columbus can't be credited with discovering America because the Vikings were here hundreds of years before him. I think that's great. But if you would have done a citation and showed me where you got that information from, I could have went back and reviewed the information, the primary documents for myself. And that would have made your writing even more impactful on me. It would have made it even more powerful on what I was reading. Oh, thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. I'll do that next time. I really like the conclusion that you did here because in the conclusion, you basically tied a bow around everything you already said. You summed up everything you already said. Just watch at the end of this talk. This is just writing. I'm going to do a conclusion that sums up everything I've already said. Because that's what I did. That's how I became a better writer. And that's how your children become better writers. And again, for all you trolls out there, I've literally published 7 books and I am literally an Amazon #1 bestseller. I don't say that to brag. I get a lot of, those type of people. So you raise critical thinkers through teaching your children history the right way, teaching them science the right way, teaching them English the right way, and then just an overall lifestyle of critical thinking. By the way, guys, like this, share this, pump it out. Because this is a very powerful talk, what I'm doing today. And for anyone that missed the beginning of this, go back. Because this is one of the most powerful educational talks you will ever hear. Critical thinking has to be a lifestyle, right? You teach your children to be critical thinking, to be critical thinkers through the way they live their lives. They should be making observations. I remember when my son was 1, we were in the backyard at my old house, and I was holding him in my arms, and it was about 5, 6 o'clock. The sun was still out. It was daytime. He points up at the sky and says, "A ball." I'm like, "What?" I look up. And for the first time in my son's life, he had recognized the moon. He noticed the moon. And I looked up. I said, "Yeah, look at that. That's the moon." And he's pointing, "Ball." I'm like, "How did that get up there? How did that moon get up there?" And just asking him questions. "What do you think? How did it get there? How does it stay there? That's amazing. He's 4 years old now, and we recently got a telescope. And by the way, I have rough plans to do a unit study on observing the moon and observing the stars, because I want to make that for my son. And as all of you know, when I make things for my son, it benefits all of us. So I plan on doing that. And we do things like that. We sit out in the backyard and we look out at nature and we do descriptive language. So I'll say, I like to do it, one of the times I like to do that is before storms. So I'll sit there with my son, I'll go, I could feel the moisture, the humidity in the air, the cool breeze on my skin. I could hear the leaves brushing together through the breeze. I could see the grass swaying slightly back and forth. The clouds in the sky, which has turned everything around us gray. And I just do descriptive language, and then I challenge my son to do descriptive language, because if you want your child to be a critical thinker, if you want them to have discernment, you have to prompt them to think critically and observe the world. And then, of course, children ask questions. So this morning, my son asked me about flying lizards. He actually started asking about dragons, and then we got to flying lizards. And we wound up reading about flying lizards. And we talk a little bit about clicking on blue links and getting back to primary sources. Critical thinking is a lifestyle. And you teach it through the way you teach your children history, the way you teach your children science, the way you teach your children English, the observations they make, and the manner through which they live their lives, the reading you do. But critical thinking is only one aspect of raising a person who's capable of living a free life, of giving them an education worthy of freedom. Because I know a lot of philosophical people who struggle to get through life, to be successful in life, and they're very intelligent people. But your children need skills. Just like those colonists, right, who were able to get the Sugar Act and the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act repealed, those people had skills. Because our children should be carpenters. Our children should be engineers, photographers, videographers, computer coders. They should be artists. They should be musicians. They should know how to fix toilets. They should be estheticians. They should know how to cut hair. Skills over subject matter. Not that subjects don't matter. But our children should have skills, because it only takes one skill to free a man. And the school system will look you in the eyes with a straight face, and they'll tell you, oh, we teach skills. You have the children for 15 years and give them one semester of woodwork, and you'll say with a straight face that you teach skills? No, if you want your child to know carpentry, starting from the time they're 4 or 5 years old, do one carpentry project a month. So if you start when they're 5, by the time they're 6, they've done 12 carpentry projects. By the time they're 7, they've done 24. By the time they're 8, they've done 36. By the time they're 9, they've done 48. By the time they're 10, they've done 60 carpentry projects. So then you take a child with skills, and I can show you how to get them entrepreneurial experience. A 5-year-old could start a lemonade stand. A 7-year-old could host a bake sale. A 10-year-old could start a photography business. A 13-year-old that's been doing all that carpentry, 60, 72, 84, 96 carpentry projects, is capable of refurbishing furniture and selling it at the local flea market. And an 18-year-old that has had a childhood filled with entrepreneurial experience is capable of living a free and independent life in which they are not dependent on the government, they are not dependent on corporations, and they are not dependent on you, their parents. An education worthy of freedom. So take that 10-year-old who's interested in photography, and you have them do a unit study, maybe from Gather Round, on photography. They have a good one on photography. Get them a camera. Say, hey, you want your photos to pop? You should look into graphic design. What's graphic design, Dad? Let me tell you. They learn graphic design. I made a great joke about the moon landing. I didn't nail it here. But at the conference, I said, what's graphic design? You could put birds in the back of your photograph. You could change the color in the background. You could even fake a moon landing. Got a big laugh. I was happy. I really wanted to nail that one. But you have your children take photography. You have your children take graphic design, and then you challenge them. You say, come October, your schooling is going to be to start a small photography business. Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, but if you're going to do that, people are going to have to know about it. So you're going to have to know about marketing. What's marketing? Let's read about marketing. How do you want to do marketing? You want to put flyers on the neighbors' doors? You probably should have good artwork so your flyers really pop. Why don't we take courses in sketching? Why don't we take courses in digital illustration? Let's get good at art. So then your children get that job. They get hired to do seasonal Christmas photos from the neighbors. They make some money, so you have them read books on financial literacy. And now they took photos, so they have a portfolio. Hey, if you want to get more clients, you have to show off this portfolio to the world. How do I do that? You could take classes in HTML and web design, and we could build a website. And boom, next thing you know, your children are building their own website. And they're designing it. They're using their photographs. They're using their art. They're using their graphic design. And you have them read books on social media marketing, and they discover that videography is one of the most powerful forms, short form videography of social media marketing. Want to take a course in that? And now you took your child's interest in photography and you turned that into skills in photography, in graphic design, in art, in marketing, in web design, in financial literacy, in social media marketing, digital illustration. We follow the interest of our children. We use the interest of our children to develop skills. We use the skills to get our children entrepreneurial experience. We use their entrepreneurial experience to develop a mindset of abundance and to develop more skills. We focus on critical thinking. We focus on skill development. We focus on entrepreneurial experience. And if we do those things, we will raise 18-year-olds who are not reliant on the government, who are not reliant on corporations, who are not reliant on their parents, who have been given an education worthy of freedom. For anyone interested in what I do, you can find it at www.classicallearner.com. Our private homeschool community is Homeschools Connected. You get access to myself, open chat, our community chat of hundreds of parents that have accumulated literally thousands of years of homeschool experience, our state groups so that you can connect with people in the state that you live, all the courses I put out, courses on the Bill of Rights and American Revolution, propaganda that I teach using the Cubs to Bears children book series that I wrote, our science experiments that are designed to teach children the scientific method as much as it's designed to teach science itself, our STEM projects that challenge children to think critically, solve problems as they learn the basics of architecture and engineering, our historical unit studies that are based around getting back to primary documents and first-hand accounts, unit studies on the medical industrial complex, courses on the media industrial complex, year-long unit studies that prioritize real skills and get children entrepreneurial experience. So for anyone interested in, that's classicallearner.com, Homeschools Connected, and if you decide to join Homeschools Connected and you use the discount code FREEDOM, all lowercase, no spaces, it is the very high cost of $10 a month. And that was the speech I gave at the Beartaria Times National Festival. And it was a great honor for me to be there. And I said it at the speech, but I truly am honored. Like, I live my life in a way where a lot of people I meet in the world, like, I respect people, but, like, I move my I'm a dedicated father. I haven't drank alcohol in almost 3 years. I don't watch inappropriate stuff that some adults watch, ever. I don't ever, because that would be disrespectful to my wife, and that would be against the teachings of Christ, who I attempt to follow in the best way that I can. I do the best that I can to live my life without debt. I don't try to keep up with the Joneses. I don't try to be a special boy. I don't try to dress nice and impress people in that sort of superficial way. I mean, I probably should actually present myself nicer, but there's a line with that. There's a line with that. I move my family across the country. I attempt to grow my food. I am starting a homestead. I am a very devoted father. I am a very devoted husband. I will have as many children as God is willing to bless me with, and my wife feels that her body is physically capable of doing. I study my rights. I know my rights. I exercise my rights. I have permits in the areas that you have to have permits in this country to exercise your rights. Which, whatever. But, so I do all that. So when I tell you that I started my own company, I run my company doing something I believe in. My company helps people educate their children and does change lives. That's objective reality. Makes the world a better place. That's objective reality. I write books for children in stuff that I believe in. And I was going somewhere where, and I outlined that background because I was going to speak somewhere where these are the people that I admire. These are the people that have helped shape who I am. And the reason I do these things in large part is to the community and the example that these people have put forth. By the way, I'm not affiliated with this, but for anyone who's interested in this community I'm talking about, I don't get paid on this or anything. If you go onto the App Store and type in the Beartaria Times app, you will see what I'm talking about. Right? You'll see what I'm talking, who these people are. So these are the people that I admire, and these are the people that I look up to. And when I see the manner of which these people live their lives, I say, that's how I should live my life. And that's what I've attempted to do. And I fall short of these people. I mean, the things that some of these people do. I was talking to this guy, Mr. Permy Bear, and his homestead and the way he lives his life, right? I was talking to him at the end of the event. There was a concert, and Anchor Bear, who is just the best concert I've ever went to. And I've like never been a person who's like, oh my God, a celebrity. Like, I think that's like so lame and whatnot. But Anchor, who by the way, I'm friends with, like, he's actually done the narrations of the digital copies of my Cubs to Bears books. Like, we've talked, we've texted, inbox back and forth for years now. But I was giddy to see Anchor Bear live. Like, and the concert was the best concert I ever went to. And afterwards, I was hanging out with Anchor and like 15 other people, and we were just shooting the shit. And like, I was giddy, like fanboying. Like, I never do this, but I took out the camera and I was like, nah, Anchor. And like, we took a selfie. I'm going to post it to Homeschools Connect. I was so excited to meet Anchor. And like, he is such a legend. And then after, I was talking to Mr. Permy Bear, and like, it's 9:30, 10 at night, and I'm in the back of his truck, and I'm buying seeds from him, and he's giving me all these organic heirloom seeds, and I'm talking to his wife, and I was talking to him about his family, and he's like, oh yeah, I gotta go, I gotta be out of here in like 10 minutes, because I have to go milk the cows. That's a man I look up to. That's a man I admire. I want to milk cows. Because that man, he gives his family the most organic, the purest food, the most nutritious food that he can give them. The food that I give my family is not as nutritious as the food he gives his family. I admire that man. I look up to that man. I want to be like Mr. Permy Bear. I want to be a better man because I surround myself with people who are better than me. Right? He's better than me. And I don't look at that in a jealous way. I look at that in, that's someone I admire. That's one of my heroes. That's someone I want to be like. That's someone who's now a friend of mine and who I could message and say, hey, I have this problem. What do you think? That's the power of community. That's what we talked about with how the American colonists lived their lives, right? Am I a rugged individualist? When I explain how I live my life, right? You say, wow, Brett, you're a rugged individualist, right? You homestead, you do all this stuff, own your own company. And I am based and rooted in Christian community or the Bear community or Homeschools Connected community. Because our community is just like the Bear community. Melissa, who has been RVing across America and knows so much about the world. Gunter, who I don't even know if I could say some of the skills Gunter has because it's like the type of thing that get, I don't want to get Gunter axed, man. But he knows how to do some stuff. But amazing people. And now, if I need to fix something, I could call Gunter and say, how do I do this? Or if I have a problem with one of my crops or my trees, I could call Mr. Permy Bear. I could literally call this guy and he could tell me what to do. Freedom comes from rugged individualism rooted in moral community. Do you see it? Freedom comes from rugged individualism rooted in moral community. And by the way, when I was at this event, I literally left my electronic devices, my phones, I just left them places and went off and did what I was doing. Because when you have high morality communities, high trust communities, everyone lets their guard down. And there is something that is so unbelievably powerful about that. Because that's where you can start to grow and learn from one another and grow with one another. By the way, if everyone, the YouTube version of this, after this, if everyone could take the YouTube version of this afterwards and post this all over social media. Share this to all your social media accounts because this, today, is one of the most powerful talks I've ever given. And I'd like to say one more time, I'd like to thank the people that got me to Beartaria, that got me to that event. I'm not going to mention their names because I know they're very humble people and they operate underneath the radar. But if you're out there watching this, I said it during my speech. I say it again. I'm so grateful for what you've done for me. And you know who you are. The support you've done for me. You know who I'm talking about. The support you've done for me. What you did for me the first time we spoke. And that was such a great experience last year. And just the guidance you've given me, the business advice, and you know more about that stuff than I am. Like I said, this guy who operates under the radar is the type of guy like Permy Bear. And I could call and say, hey, I'm having this problem. What do I do? Surround yourself with people that are more moral than you, that make you want to be more moral. Surround yourself with people that are better homesteaders than you, that make you want to be a better homesteader. Surround yourself with people that are better business people than you, that make you want to be a better business person. And then as you do that and you grow from that community through your rugged individualism, by the very nature of you doing that, your children are now surrounded by someone who is a better homesteader, who is a better business person, who is more moral, who is a better parent, who is a better family man. Don't you see? It's so obvious once you really break it down. It's so obvious once you really break it down. And then the last person I'd like to thank one more time, I don't think he watches my streams, but if he does watch this, Owen Benjamin has had a profound impact on my life. And people could look at him and some of the things he says, which they don't understand. They assume intentions behind what he says when they do not understand his intentions, because I followed the man long enough, and when you understand the intentions, you realize that words like, oh, that's a bad word. What are the intent? Oh, it has bad intentions behind. No, it doesn't. What are you talking about? A lot of what he does is designed to break spells or to stop letting them control our language or to criticize institutions that are so powerful that even myself, who you guys know how much I say, I refrain from talking about a lot. You guys hear me talking about these things sometimes, and I kind of talk around them and you know what I'm talking about. But that man has done all that, has stood up for children that have faced some of the worst things imaginable at great expense. At great expense. I watched him get thrown out of Hollywood, have all of his finances ripped away from him when he was a husband and a father-to-be. For anyone that's a parent, they know how scary that is. And gave all that up. You judge people by what they do. By what they do. And I watched the man give away all of his finances, all of his Hollywood status, all of his lollipops and fancy pants, and all the things that go along with that. And time after time, he had the opportunity to cozy up to, first it was the Hollywood crowd, then it was, like the conservative grifter type crowd, like Steven Crowder and those guys. And time after time, I watched the guy throw away financial stability and throw away status, although his status went up in my book, so I disagree with that, but and in like moral people's book, because he did what was right. I surround myself with people that are better than me because that makes me a better person. Think about that when you raise your children. Again, for anyone who's interested in what I do, you could find it at www.classicallearner.com, Homeschools Connected, and if you decide to join, use the discount code FREEDOM, lowercase f, no space after, and it is, again, the high cost of $10 a month. So, usually I go back through all the questions, but this was such an elaborate talk, and I just wanted to get through this because I really wanted to talk about my speech, talk about my experience, and next year, when they host the event again, we had a couple of members of Homeschools Connected there. Hardwood Bear was there with his beautiful family. Mrs. Florida Bear was there with her beautiful family. And Mr. Hardwood Bear, who I only spoke to him for like a second, but I spoke to his wife for a while. Camera Bear and his amazing family, who I've met a couple times now, and he has such, I'm not going to get into his, but he has such an impressive thing he has going on over there. And anyway, I hope to get more of us there next year, and every one of us should be a member of the bear community. Like, you guys love what I do, and everyone listening to this, by the way, should be a member of Homeschools Connected. We have a community that is just as wonderful and built in the same spirit as the bear community. And if you want to see what they're all about, again, I don't get paid on this. It's what I believe in. You go to the App Store, type in the Beartaria Times, and you will see a social media. Their rule over there are no politics over there. The rule over there is there's none of it. There's no Babylon there. It's only the good, true, and beautiful, and only posting things that are appropriate for 5-year-olds. And when you go to that social media, you see just how bright the future is. That they want us to think that there's this scary world out there. They want us to think that there's this despair out there. Like, you hear people say, how can you raise children in this world? You don't live in the same world I live in. Because when you surround yourself with the Homeschools Connected people, with Melissa, with Gunter, with Jennifer, when you surround yourself with these people, with Marine Princess, when you surround yourself with the bear community, with Bowler Bear and Mr. Permy and Anchor Bear and all of these amazing people who are just regular people who I surround myself with, who, because of what I do, because of my homeschooling, I'm contacted by so many people. People with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm not kidding you. I know tons of people, not tons, but like a handful of people with 11 children who are homesteaders who raise them right. The future is so bright. Don't let them fool you with despair. Don't let them trick you into thinking that this is not a world worth having kids in, because this is a better time to have children than ever before. Than ever before. Because our ancestors made some good times, and then the boomer generation came along, and they were all special boys, and they embraced all the loans and the bank debt and all of the keeping up with the Joneses and the disgusting culture and the hookup culture and the sex, drugs, and rock and roll and live free, right? Like, they embraced all of that nonsense that they brought into our world, and they, because they were so weak, now we came up in some tough times. Like, now we're seeing the financial system collapse, and, you know, the type of tyranny that we've seen over the last couple of years. Okay, and do you see what's happening? Look at this talk. Tough times make tough people. If you spoke to me when I'm 34 now. If you spoke to me when I was 24, I was pathetic. All I cared about was going out with my friends and getting drunk and hooking up with girls and nonsense. Nonsense. I didn't take responsibility. I was keeping up with the Joneses. I mean, I was never so much into that, but, you know, more than now I just, ugh. But, you know, I was pathetic, you know, and I never was like a guy with bad intentions or anything. And like, don't get me wrong, I was never too keepy up with the Joneses type stuff, but like, you know, I was really about that just hookup culture, going out, getting drunk. Life's all about that, right? Like that do as thou wilt type of thing, right? But then I started to get exposed to tough times. I started to wake up to the world. I came across Richard Grove, right? And I started to wake up to the world, and I started to get exposed to, wow, these are tough times. And tough times forged me into a tough man. And these tough times will forge our children into tough young men and to tough young women. This is a better time to raise children than it has been in generations. So get married, find someone that is every bit your equal, and start a life with them. A good life. Stop keeping up with the Joneses. Stop embracing that nonsense and build a life. Get an acre of land in a flyover state. I only want to be in flyover states. I don't want to be in Babylon. Get an acre of land in Missouri and just start building small. Start with a tiny house. Start with an RV. And as you start to grow in life and you start to accumulate assets by living within your means, you can start to do more and more. Don't ever, ever, ever let finances get in the way of having children. Money is not wealth. Children are wealth. When you grow up, when you get old, you're not going to want to have a lot of money. What you're going to want is to be surrounded by love. And the more children you have, the wealthier you will be. The wealthier you will be. You want to be surrounded by children who will never put you in a nursing home, who will take care of you, because that's the best investment you could ever make. Because if they love you, they'll take care of you. Invest in this, invest in that, invest in your children. Like, ever people talk about financial investment. Children are a financial burden. Oh yeah? Wait until you're old and it's like time to, you either need to have someone take care of you or like be in a nursing home. And then you'll find out that children were the best financial investment you ever made. Because I will never allow my mother to be in a nursing home. I'll never allow my father to be in a nursing home. I will literally, if I have to, wipe their behinds every day. And let's, God, I'm hoping that's not the lesson I have to learn. But if it is, I embrace everything you throw at me. I was speaking to one of the Bears this weekend, and I was telling them how I pray. And it's actually antithetical to what most people think and to what most people do. When I pray, I don't ever ask God for anything, except I ask God to put me where God knows I belong. Not where he thinks I belong, because God knows where I belong. And I ask God to put me where I belong, and to put me on whatever path is the path that I need for my soul to grow and to become a better person. And that's what I pray for. And obviously, I tell God, like, I hope that's an easier path. I hope that's an easier path. Is that Anchor Bear in the house? I hope that's an easier path. But if that's a harder path, that's a harder path. And that's God's choice. And to the point, when I say I don't ask God for anything, I don't even ask God for the health and the life of my wife or the health and the life of my children anymore. I ask God that he sends my wife and he sends my children on whatever path he knows will help their souls grow so that they could ascend into the kingdom of heaven. And if that means we have to struggle, if that means my children, sorry about that. If my children have to struggle, then that's the path I accept. That's the path I accept. And that's what life's about. We got to grow as people. So anyway, I think I'm going to call it a talk on that. So I think this was probably the most powerful talk I've ever given. If you guys can share this talk on all your social media, I usually don't ask you guys to do this, but if you guys can, everywhere you are on social media, grab the YouTube version of this and share it everywhere, because this is I think this is the most powerful talk I've ever given. It's one of the most valuable talks on education I've ever given, and on what freedom really is, and how we grow as people, as a community, as individuals. And when we want to grow, a lot of people see the outward things that we do. But the reason I've been able to do powerful outward things or like powerful things in the world, like my homeschool community, is because I first embraced that in order to fix the world, and Bowler Bear gave a talk about this weekend, in order to fix the world, we first have to look in the mirror. And we have to start fixing ourselves. And every day, I live my life, and I try as best I can. I'm just trying. I try as best I can to fix myself and to be a better person myself. And I fall dreadfully short of that. But that's, we make the world better by analyzing ourselves and saying, what am I doing wrong? What's wrong with me? And how do I become a more moral person? How do I become a more dependable person? And if we do that, the world will get better. So, all right, guys, I'm gonna call it on that. ClassicalLearner.com, Homeschools Connected, and like I said, if you guys could just share this one everywhere today, I would really appreciate that. And Anchor Bear's in the house. Like I said, the best concert I've ever been to. And share Anchor Bear stuff. You could find him on Anchor Tones, Anchor Bear, and Justin Rancho on Instagram and YouTube. And if you go to Spotify and type in Anchor Bear, he's on there. His music is moral, and it is fire. And I was talking to Joe Gagan about this. Neither one of us could wrap our heads around the range. Hey, darling. The range of your music. Like, you go from like Irish music to rock music to like rap music, and it's straight lettuce, as I like to say, because lettuce is where it's at. We had to leave 30 minutes ago. Okay, my wife says we have to go. We have to go run some errands, I believe. So, all right. I just have to print one thing, and we'll go.
Leaving you.
She's leaving me. I hope not permanently. So,
Have a nice day. See you next fall.
I think you've been alone with the kids enough. Don't get stung by a wasp again.
There's so many spiders.
The CIA is after my wife again.
Why are they after you?
They're coming for you, girl. All right, guys. I'm going to now count to 10 to account for the delay, and I'm going to sip on this cup in honor of Melissa. Ah. That's some good stuff.